The forest was quiet that morning. Sunlight filtered through the trees. The sound of the river carried in the background. Yet in the heart of Idaho's rugged wilderness, a child's voice would never be heard again. What happened at Timber Creek Campground in July of 2015 remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in modern America. It is a story that begins with a 2-year-old boy with blonde hair, chubby cheeks, and a smile that could light up his mother's world. A boy named Dior Kuntz Jr., affectionately called Little Man by those who loved him. A child whose life was filled with innocence and wonder. A toddler who adored toy trucks, warm hugs, and making his mother laugh. A boy curious enough to toddle after butterflies, and independent enough to follow his parents when they tried to slip away for a moment. Yet he was so small, weighing just 30 pounds, vulnerable in a world where one mistake, one moment of distraction, could change everything forever. That is exactly what happened on July 10th, 2015, when his family's camping trip became a nightmare that still has no end. A day that started like any other summer adventure, but ended in despair, confusion, and accusations that shattered lives and divided a community. The night before, July 9th, 2015, was unremarkable on the surface. Dior's parents, 20-something Jessica Mitchell, and her fiancé Dior Sr., known as Vernal, decided to take a spontaneous trip out of town. They were accompanied by Jessica's elderly grandfather, Robert Bob Walton, and a friend of the family, 20-something Isaac Reinwand. They drove 2.5 hours from Idaho Falls to the small town of Leodore before winding their way into the remote and scenic Timber Creek Campground, nestled deep within the eastern Idaho mountains. There, pine trees stretch skyward, the river winds its way past rocks, and wildlife roams freely, a setting both peaceful and perilous. They stopped briefly at a local convenience store before pushing on toward their destination. Spirits were light, the air filled with the promise of marshmallows roasted over a fire and quiet time away from the noise of the city. When they arrived, they found what seemed to be the perfect spot, a campsite by the river with no other campers nearby, a pocket of privacy in the wild. They parked the camp trailer, unloaded their gear, and soon were gathered around the fire. Laughter mixed with the crackle of flames as the night grew darker and the stars above seemed infinite. For a moment, it was simply a family camping trip like countless others across America. But when dawn broke on July 10th, the fragile thread holding their lives together would snap. After breakfast, Isaac wandered down toward the river to fish, his line cutting into the water as he searched for a quiet moment. Jessica and Vernal bundled Little Man into their truck for a quick run into town to the general store. The toddler was strapped into his car seat, his small hands clutching at his blanket, his toy monkey resting close by, because those were his comforts, his constant companions. After the errand, the family returned to the campground, planning to fish as well. It was then that a fateful decision was made. Jessica and Vernal, eager to try their luck with fishing poles in hand, began to walk toward the riverbank. They told their son to stay behind with his great-grandfather Bob, who was resting at camp. The boy initially trailed after his parents, as toddlers do, his small boots crunching on the ground, before being told to stay put, reassured they'd be back soon. So, he turned back toward camp, an innocent child, trusting that he was safe under the watch of family. But in that instant, fate intervened. Grandpa Bob would later say in interviews that he never realized Jessica and Vernal had asked him to watch the boy. He thought the toddler had gone with his parents. He himself went into the trailer for a short time. When he emerged, the child was gone, vanished into thin air as though swallowed by the forest itself. By the time Jessica and Vernal returned a half hour later, excitement about fishing gave way to panic as they discovered their son was nowhere in sight. The campsite was eerily silent, except for their desperate voices calling his name, their shouts echoing through the trees. 4 adults spread out in every direction, searching frantically for a small boy in a camouflage jacket, blue pants, and cowboy boots. A boy who had never been without his blanket and toy monkey, both of which still lay abandoned at the campsite. A detail that would send shivers down the spines of investigators later, because it suggested the child had not simply wandered off on his own. At 2:30 p.m., Jessica placed the call that would set in motion one of Idaho's most extensive and heartbreaking investigations, reporting her son missing to dispatch, her voice trembling with fear. Within hours, the Lemhi County Sheriff's Department mobilized. But the remoteness of the location meant nearly 2 hours passed before an official search could begin. Precious time slipped away. When the search did commence, it focused on the nearby river. Divers combed the waters, teams scoured the banks, the terrifying possibility of a drowning hanging heavy in the air. But despite exhaustive efforts, nothing was found. No shoes, no clothing, no trace of a small body. Nothing to suggest a child had fallen into the river. As days passed, searchers broadened their efforts, bringing in scent dogs, helicopters, and ground crews, methodically covering the terrain. But the forest gave up no answers, no clues, no trace of a 2-year-old who could not have gotten far on his own. Suspicion began to creep in. If he hadn't drowned, and he hadn't wandered into the forest to fall prey to the elements or wildlife, then what had happened? Had someone taken him? Yet there had been no other campers in the area, no signs of strangers nearby, and no evidence of an abduction. The case grew colder with each passing week. Months slipped by, and still there was no new lead. Whispers began to turn toward the family itself. The inconsistencies in their stories began to mount. Investigators began to notice cracks in the narrative. Both Jessica and Vernal recounted interactions in town the morning of Dior's disappearance, claiming that locals had seen their son. But when police questioned those witnesses, not one remembered seeing the boy, only an empty car seat. A chilling inconsistency that cast shadows on the parents' accounts. Polygraph tests administered to Jessica and Vernal came back as failures, their shifting stories leaving law enforcement frustrated. The once supportive community of Idaho Falls began to sour, suspicion slowly eroding sympathy. Nearly a year after Dior's disappearance, a bombshell discovery would further deepen the mystery. Inside Jessica's storage unit, investigators found the camouflage jacket that she had insisted her son had been wearing on the day he vanished. A piece of evidence that should have been lost forever with the boy, but instead hidden away. The discovery raised more questions than answers and fueled the growing suspicion that something terrible had happened within the family circle. By then, investigators officially named Jessica and Vernal as suspects in their son's disappearance, while also listing Grandpa Bob and Isaac Reinwand as persons of interest. Yet no arrests were made, no charges filed. Despite the shadows, there was no body, no crime scene, Nothing tangible to prove foul play, only suspicion and theories. One theory that persisted was that of a wild animal, a predator lurking in the woods, a bear, a wolf, a mountain lion, a creature that could have snatched the boy in seconds, his 30-pound frame no match for the power of the wilderness. But that theory never fully held. Had such an attack occurred, there should have been evidence: blood, torn clothing, drag marks, and the family insisted they heard no screams, no signs of a struggle. Investigators began to consider darker possibilities. Perhaps Dior had died not at the hands of an animal, nor a stranger, but within the circle of trust itself. Perhaps the boy never even made it to the campground. Perhaps the camping trip was staged as a cover, a decoy to explain away a disappearance that had already happened, a chilling possibility that fractured the narrative entirely. A private investigator hired by extended family members later concluded bluntly that the boy was either murdered or accidentally killed by his own parents. Even with that damning assessment, the case remained stagnant. It stalled by the absence of hard evidence. The boy's small body was never recovered, his fate locked in silence. Over the years, anniversaries came and went. The Timber Creek campground transformed into a place haunted not by campfire stories, but by the absence of a child's laughter. His face stared back from missing posters that weathered and faded. His family fractured under the weight of suspicion and grief. In July 2023, 8 long years after the disappearance, Dior's grandmother, Tina Clegg, issued a heart-wrenching statement. She spoke of her ongoing nightmare, her eternal hope, her prayers for answers that had never come. She remembered his beautiful eyes and smile. Her words were a testament to a love that refuses to die, even as the mystery endures. She thanked those who have not forgotten. She vowed never to give up until her last breath. And so, the case of baby Dior remains open, suspended in a fog of unanswered questions. A story filled with red herrings and contradictions. A riddle that resists resolution. What truly happened in those woods remains locked away in the silence of 4 adults whose stories never quite aligned, a silence that grows louder with every passing year. As the shadows lengthen over Timber Creek, the image of a small boy in cowboy boots, a camouflage jacket, clutching his toy monkey, lingers in the imagination, a ghost of innocence lost, leaving behind only a haunting question that chills the soul. Whatever happened to baby Dior?